February of this year, 8BitDo released the Pro 2 controller, and this controller is compatible with Switch, Windows, Android, Mac OS, Steam, Raspberry Pi, and basically anything that will allow a generic USB or Bluetooth controller to pair to it. I've been using it on the Mister, I've been using it on the Switch, I've been using it on Windows quite a bit over the last couple of months, and overall, I gotta say, I'm quite impressed with this new effort from 8BitDo. So we're gonna go over this controller kind of in detail, and I'll show you what I like, what I don't like, and I'll tell you, frankly, that I do recommend this controller quite a bit. So let's take a look at the front of the controller. Obviously, the front of the controller is still kind of styled like a Super Nintendo controller. It's still kind of got that basic layout and shape to it, with the addition of these hand grips and obviously thumbsticks as well. We also have a few special buttons for selecting modes or going the home button on a Nintendo Switch, things like that. We have the standard face buttons here. A couple of notes about these face buttons. They're a little bit smaller than you might expect compared to modern controllers like a PlayStation 5 controller. They're a little bit smaller and a little bit moved in toward the middle of the controller. You can see they're a little bit further away from the edge of the controller. And what that means is that when I'm hitting the furthest to the right button here, my thumb is actually a little bit further away from my finger here, which actually, compared to something like the PlayStation 5 controller where my thumb has to get very close to this finger, I find it actually more comfortable. So I like that decision to move all these buttons here a little bit inward, a little bit away from the edge of the controller. It just makes for a more comfortable long-term user experience for me. The smaller buttons were a little bit concerning to me when I first took it out of the box, but once I started playing with the controller for the last couple of months, it really has not bothered me at all. And I find the buttons very responsive and very tactile, satisfying, I guess you would say. They're good buttons, is what I mean to say. We got the start and select buttons here as well. These are kind of just rubber buttons like you'd see on a standard Super Nintendo controller. And the D-pad. The D-pad is something that 8BitDo has struggled with in the past. With earlier controllers, they had an issue where you meant to hit like directly to the right, but sometimes you got like weird diagonal inputs kind of by accident. That seems to be solved with the Pro 2. I have not had that issue with this controller. So hopefully that is something that 8BitDo has been able to just engineer out of their products from here on out. I don't know if that problem will show up in the future, but so far with this controller, I have not had that issue whatsoever. And to be honest, I really like this D-pad. I think it's a fantastic D-pad for fighting games, for 2D games, for any reason that you would need a D-pad. This is just a very comfortable and very responsive D-pad that I like quite a bit. Thumbsticks are great too. The thumbsticks are actually customizable using 8BitDo's software. They feel very good. They feel a lot like a PlayStation 4 controller. The thumbsticks just have a very similar feel in that way. They're very close together like a PlayStation controller would be. But for the most part, my thumbs have not touched each other when I've actually been playing a game. But in the future, I wouldn't mind if 8BitDo decided to make, let's say, a Pro 3 a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, and they actually were able to spread these two thumbsticks apart, kind of similar to the PlayStation 5 controller here, where you can see those thumbsticks are actually just a bit further apart than they used to be, meaning that you're just not going to hit your thumbs together when you're kind of going toward the inside of both thumbsticks. I like that a lot about the new PlayStation 5 controller, and I wouldn't mind seeing 8BitDo's Pro 3 controller just get a little bit wider for that reason. Otherwise, it's very comfortable. These grips on the side, they just fit very securely in your palm. They're very comfortable. They almost feel like a combination, like somewhere in between like a PlayStation 4 and a PlayStation 3 controller in how comfortable it is. I really like it. I find the controller very comfortable over long play sessions, and I really have no complaints in that regard. The controller is also very solid. This controller feels like a first-party controller. There's no creaking, there's no kind of twisting. Everything just feels solid, well-engineered, and built with good quality materials. There's no complaints to me in that department at all. And that's really what I've been most impressed about with the 8BitDo controller, is this feels like a first-party controller, but for the Switch, or for a Raspberry Pi, or for Windows, or for Android, or for other things that there's not necessarily a good first-party controller option for. And I really like that about this. Looking up at the top, you can see that there's L1, R1, L2, R2 buttons up here. The buttons feel great. The triggers feel really good. The travel on them is very smooth. There's no rubbing. There's no clicking. It just feels like a nice first-party controller as far as these triggers go. I really have no complaints there. We got a pair button up here for pairing the Bluetooth to whatever device you want to pair it to, and also USB-C for connecting it with a hard wire to a PC or whatever you want to connect it to, and obviously for charging the battery. Looking around the back, we have a slide-off cover. You can actually replace the battery on this, so once you've gone through the battery's kind of charging cycle, once the battery actually wears out from having too many charges in it, you can just replace that battery very easily, as opposed to most first-party controllers where there's no obvious way to get into these anymore to do something like that. So that's awesome that you can just replace that battery super easy by just ordering a new one off of 8BitDo's website. That's dope. We also have a mode switch here, which is a new feature for this Pro 2 controller. Previously with 8BitDo controllers, when you wanted to turn them on and pair them to a new device, or to change which device you're paired to, you had to go through some kind of like a button sequence, and you had to remember what that button sequence is, or find the directions, or look it up online. It was usually pretty simple, like hold start and X at the same time to turn it on, and that would pair it to like a Windows computer, or hold start and B, and that would pair it to a Switch, something like that. With this switch on the back here, that's no longer an issue. It's clearly labeled SADX, and depending on what you want to compare it to, that is going to correspond. So obviously S is Switch, X is like Windows, D I think is Android, or maybe A is Android. But it's easy to do, and here's what's awesome about this, is that when I switch this mode selector, I don't really need to pair it to something I've already paired it to. So let's say I've paired it to my Switch in S, and I've paired it to my Windows computer in X mode. When I switch back to S and go to turn on my Switch, it remembers. I don't have to repair it to my Switch again. The Switch knows what it is, it sees it, and that makes it very convenient to use on multiple devices. And that's kind of how I've been using this controller, is on multiple devices. I use it on my Mister, I use it on my Switch, and I use it on my Windows machine as a controller. And it's really been flawless as far as having to just move that switch back and forth to select which mode it is going into for pairing. And that's been really simple and a big improvement over previous 8BitDo controllers. Also on the back of the controller, you'll notice we have a couple of back buttons. These back buttons are customizable. They can emulate any of the buttons on the front, even the D-pad buttons. So for instance, if you're a first-person shooter player and you want these to be melee and jump, you can set that up. If you want them to be up on the directional pad, you can select that for a fighting game. For whatever you want to do, these are very customizable. And frankly, at this price point, awesome, because for most consoles, let's say a PlayStation, to get something with back buttons, you're going to have to go with something like a SCUF controller, which can be upwards of $200. This is a much cheaper option and includes those back buttons for that functionality. So if you play a lot of PC games, play a lot of Switch games, play any games that you really would like those back buttons for, they're included and they're fully customizable, which is awesome. This controller is extremely impressive. At the price point, I don't think there's really anything that competes with it that has the amount of versatility that the Pro 2 has. But it's also, I think, on the Switch, an even better option than Nintendo's first-party Switch Pro controller. Not only is it cheaper and includes back buttons, but I just find that the whole controller is more comfortable, more robust, and I think just a better controller than the Switch Pro controller, which I think is really an impressive feat from a third-party maker from 8Bitdo. I'm really a big fan of this controller. I'd highly recommend checking it out if you're interested in it. Comes in a few different colors. This is kind of the gray PlayStation look. It also has kind of like a white Game Boy look to it. Really good controller. Highly recommend it. Definitely give this one a shot if you're looking for something for your Switch, for a Raspberry Pi, Android, Windows, whatever. It will not work with an Xbox. It will not work with a PlayStation, obviously. So keep that in mind. It really is kind of a generic controller, or a controller to use for a system that can use a generic controller. That's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that like button if you like this video. Hit subscribe if you're new to the channel. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.